Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel where we are talking about our first film of 2024. Now, that's hard to do because it's January. And when it's January, there's not a bunch of new releases. There's a couple things we could have talked about, like The Beekeeper, but I'm not a big Statham guy, and I'm like, that's probably a fun time. I don't really care. Mean Girls, the musical, the movie. I went to the musical instead of the movie, actually, and I did not have fun, so I didn't really want to go back and see the movie based on the musical based on the movie. I was looking at what's playing at a local cinema, and this movie appeared, and I was like, I don't know much about this, but it's kind of interesting the way it sounds. This is the Book of Clarence. This is the latest film from Jaymes Samuels. You might know him from his stage name or his stage persona, The Bullets. Couple years ago, he directed The Harder They Fall on Netflix, which is a really interesting, modern kind of update on the Western genre, which was a movie I enjoyed for the most part. There's a couple things there I didn't really love, but I thought it was a really cool effort. Now he's back with The Book of Clarence, which is getting a theatrical release. It is from TriStar and Legendary, which is like, okay, go off. Like, we don't see that combination happening sometimes. And we get a new movie. The Book of Clarence, what is it about? Well, it is a biblical epic. This is a biblical epic coming to theaters in 2024, which is cool. It's very interesting to talk about and to think about because this is a genre that used to be very popular. The big historical epic, we have big sets, big costumes. These were the movies people went to see. And when you're doing the biblical stuff, literally talking about the characters from the Bible, that kind of gets into murky waters about what people want to see and about what people don't want to see. I get that. We're in an era where Angel Studios, which I have thoughts on, we don't need to get into in this one, they're kind of running the table for the faith-based stuff, that's cool. I have nothing against them. I have nothing to really defend or support in any capacity. They've made some interesting things. They made stuff I don't like. So to have a director and another company really be like, no, we're going to put some faith into releasing an actual biblical epic, that's kind of impressive. Now, it's not a huge budget. I think it's around $40 million, and it's coming out in January, so it's not like the biggest pure to faith thing where they're like, yeah, we're going to make so much money back. But the Book of Clarence, for it being a movie with a director I am fond enough of, in a genre that I would love to see more from, in a world I'm fine exploring, I genuinely enjoyed this film. I liked it a lot. Now there's stuff in here that is going to be very hard to talk about, and one of the things I don't love to do when it comes to this channel is bring the topics of religion and politics into this. You should really just be able to explore and talk about everything without having your own personal beliefs or the personal beliefs of the person who's watching this affect it. But we're talking about a religious satire in some essence. It could be perceived as sacrilegious, it could be perceived as blasphemous in some ways. And that's solely up to the person watching the piece. If you perceive what is being said as sacrilegious now, from what I gathered and from what I know myself and my beliefs and all that stuff, this never came across as the filmmaker being sacrilegious, though the story could have elements that people don't like that way, and that is perfectly fine. So if you maybe don't want to see a different skewing of the story of Jesus or the apostles or any of that stuff, perhaps this is not the one to see, and that's fine. You know, like, I get that. But at the same time, I don't see how it's any different than other epics of the time. It kind of plays like the life of Brian in a small way, but if you were to like modernize and contextualize that for like today's audiences, with the influence that we have in filmmakers today, with the way we tell stories today, it's kind of like that. Now, it's not a straight up comedy like the life of Brian, and it doesn't need to be. It is still funny. It's less like the satire. It's like we're poking fun of religion, we're making fun of everybody, and it's just more like watching, I think, both the character in the movie and the filmmaker explore a relationship with God and belief through the basis of wanting to know what is real and what isn't. A main crux of this movie, and we'll get into like the plot in a minute here, is very much knowledge over belief. Like the main character is somebody who is living in this time period, seeing like like this blind faith being this realized thing, and it's kind of like sweeping the masses and people are starting to believe that. But he is somebody who is looking at the harshness of the world, everything around them, and he can't believe there is a God because of the way the world is, the way people aren't treated equally, the way everything is broken. Now, that is very interesting for a biblical setting to play with that. That is a very modern theme to play with, just like the idea that how can you just blindly believe something when you look at the world around you? That's a very modern setting. But to throw that into this time period, there is something to say there. And this movie does that for the most part in a very interesting way. We are following Clarence. He is the brother of the Apostle Thomas, the twin brother, both played by Lakeith Stanfield, who gets like literally top billing. It's like Lakeith Stanfield into the Book of Clarence, which is really cool to see. And he is just like upset that his brother kind of left their family to go do this blind worship and isn't helping their mother, isn't really like seeing the world at large around them. Now Clarence, he's kind of in bad situations of people in the town, and he has some, bad standings, and like this woman that he really loves, played by Anna Diop, her brother wants to kill him. So he needs to find a way to make some money quick so he can save his hide, essentially. And that leads him to starting his own like role as a messiah. So at first he wants to become the 13th apostle. And they're like, you're doing this for yourself. It's not about you. It's about the others. And then he's like, well, I can become a messiah. And then he kind of takes the role of Jesus in that sense. And then it becomes about a crucifixion involving him. And I don't want to get too spoilery into it. One of the things that this does is kind of take the role of Jesus and apply it to Clarence. And that's going to be hard for people to realize. But if you're just perceiving this as like, this is a guy who is learning through the hardships of the Jesus of Nazareth story, what his place in the world is to be, and how he's going to learn about faith, it does it pretty convincingly. And that's where I go against like, oh, this is sacrilegious and stuff. He's learning to believe in God. Like, that is his journey throughout this whole piece, is him going from somebody who can't believe in this blind faith to actually believing it. Now, it kind of does it in a setting where it's like, well, he actually gets knowledge, so the knowledge becomes his belief. But that's okay. And I guess that could kind of be one of the detriments to this movie, is that in the nature of this film, Jesus is real. The stuff he is capable of doing is real. The power of God is real. All of that in this movie is presented as something that is real. Like, Jesus is a character. He is played by an actor, and he has special abilities for healing and changing the way people perceive the world. So that kind of takes away like the basic idea of the knowledge and belief, and kind of makes it more like, oh, it's like the belief you can still have, but there is knowledge that this is actually possible. And that kind of can give Clarence the shortcut to being the person who gets all the answers, and he finds his way through the end. But it works fine. I don't think there's anything truly upsetting about what they do in that capacity. It does pretty well, and it's fine. Like, this is a modern movie, and that's cool. Like, to actually like tell a biblical epic in a modern lens, that's not something we do very often. And it is presented a lot like The Harder They Fall. Jaymes Samuels is a musician. He's a singer-songwriter, not primarily, but that's what he did for a long time. So he is scoring and doing the music to this film. So he is just looking at this visually through like a music video lens. And that is really cool to see, because then it treats these characters with not like a higher echelon than what they've ever had before, but it's like, oh, these are like badass guys. We're treating the apostles and Jesus and like the world we're at in this moment in like these higher stakes, and it's really interesting to see that. The music is great. The way it treats its characters is great. It's kind of like this postmodern gang thing where it's like, oh, these are like the tough guys on the streets. We're in Jerusalem, but there's still like crime and stuff, and everyone's just trying to like get by doing shady stuff. There's like street races with chariots, and people just getting killed with spears on the streets and everything. But there's still like slavery going on, and there's still like these weird ideas being presented. And that's a really interesting thing to explore. Like when the apostles first show up, we have like a really cool music cue where they just like walk in like these cloaks and this badass energy. They're like whipping like their cross chains around. It's really interesting, and it's not something that has really been explored in this capacity, because this is also a biblical epic. It is that, but it's also a story of classism, the haves and the have-nots, and it's a Black Lives Matter story as well, which, yeah, that is a interesting way to tell this story. All of the Romans are presented as just white guys in big armor, and everyone who's just like a commoner in Jerusalem is presented as a black person. And when you have like Jesus being this guy who is speaking up for these rights and everyone is created equal, the white Romans are starting to speak against that. And when Clarence is kind of doing the thing where it's like, no, maybe what Jesus is saying isn't true, like to have faith, but I know the knowledge, and the knowledge is none of us are equal. So he's kind of taken the Jesus role in that sense too, but it's more like for knowledge as opposed to the blind faith. And then it becomes like we have to see how the white Romans react to this kind of revolution in the streets of these people. These, so-called messiahs need to be put down. And that's interesting. That is not a lens I would frame this kind of story through, because I wouldn't think of it that way. But to see a creator actually like, I told my Western through a black lens, and it actually worked well. To tell a biblical epic through a black lens, that works really well too, and it's a really fun idea. Lakeith Stanfield, fantastic. Doing double duty. Thomas isn't like a main character, but he is really good as Clarence. This is a guy who's broken, and he throughout the entire piece, he's just like upset of what he has to do in this world, and he starts to realize that there's so much injustice in it, and he's never actually been happy with a lot of the things he's done. And R.J. Cyler plays like his sidekick, and like he's becoming like these two guys were both in The Harder They Fall, and they were kind of like really cool in that movie. So if they're like staples going forward for the Bullets, that'd be really cool to see. And then it's just like a who's who of supporting cast showing up for like minor roles. Omar Sy gets like a surprisingly cool fight sequence multiple times. Like they make him up to be like a brute and a badass, and it's so cool to see. Anna Diop is just great. She's given a lot to do. Alfre Woodard is given the role of playing Mother Mary, and what they do in that sequence is really impressive. It's not talking down about Mary and Joseph, but it's also just like, this is a guy, Clarence is a guy who can't believe these stories, which feels very modern, where it's like, so you were a virgin and an angel came to you, and that's the story you're sticking with? And she's like, yeah. And then Joseph saw the angel too, and he's like, really, you saw the angel too? Like, it is something that a lot of people aren't going to enjoy, and I understand that, but it's never talking down to Mary or Joseph or Jesus or Mary Magdalene. It's never talking down to those characters. Hell, there's a sequence where like we still have Judas be the betrayer, and they recreate the Last Supper in a really intense way where you're like, this is kind of scary to watch, but it's so modern how they film that and how they do that. And this is one of those movies where it's like the perfect clash of like the classic setting. We have the big pillars, the stone everywhere, everything's made of just like this old architecture, and it looks so old. But when we put cool music into it, when we have actual good direction into it, things move well, the story is very interesting. There are some gladiatorial fights in this movie. There are some chariot races in this movie. It's a biblical epic, but it's also like, this is modern. We're talking about how like the Romans are essentially these people pushing down the black man, and we're seeing that Jesus was this guy who was real, and what he did for the world was real. There's also kind of like a little bit, this is something I don't want to spoil too much, but there's like a white savior Jesus thing that happens towards the end of the film. We're just kind of like doing a revisionist history of what Jesus actually was. It's funny and it's really interesting, but you can sense the backlash that could come from it. Now, I haven't read too many reviews on this movie. I don't think I want to, but there's just something really compelling about what this is. Like, just a bunch of black actors doing this biblical epic, making it look cool, having big sets, having great costuming, having a director who is willing to take the chances to both be earnest to the story that is told throughout history, the idea of Jesus and the apostles and what it means to be a Messiah in Rome and the crucifixion, to earnestly tell that story, but to kind of tell it in a contemporary setting of like, we can't just blindly believe things. And maybe this does in the end become like the perfect allegory of a man learning to believe in God. And that's fine. And just the way it goes about it is really different. It's very interesting. And when I went into this, like, not really sure what to expect, I was sold from the beginning. Like, the text font is the old biblical epic stuff. You know, we're presenting this in a big way. There's chapters to the story. David Oyelowo is John, the pastor, I think, and he's just insanely good in that one sequence. There is so much about this that works. And so much you're just not expecting from it, where it's neither talking down to any member of the audience, nor is it shining a light on the things that could be perceived as hypocritical or stupid. It is just presenting this as like an alternative to, like, what if there was a guy who kind of like swindled in the time of Jerusalem and he saw Jesus as a hack and then he was proven wrong. He was proven wrong. That's the big thing, is he is proven wrong at the end, that Jesus is real, his power is just, and there is still hope in the world. That's pretty interesting, you know? That's kind of cool that we could have that. Now, it's going to be in January of 2024, so nobody's going to see it, and it's not getting a super wide release, but TriStar, legendary. Push this one on home video. Put this on major platforms. Get this out there, because this movie rips. It's really fun. It's a great cast. I'm waiting for Lakeith to really pop off in a big one. This should be his big pop off, but I don't think it's going to be. And even for Jaymes Samuels, like, this should be him being like integrated into like the guys we talk about in this era. Sadly, I don't think it will, but it's that thing where you're like, I'm not expecting this to be from a director I know, but holy shit, did he pull it off immensely and make something truly fun. I really dug this movie. I think it's one everyone should check out. If you're hesitant on like, Jesus doesn't do certain things, or he's portrayed a certain way that's maybe not Jesus-like, well, that's the point. It's kind of about like who he truly is to the time as to what people perceive him in the present. And that's kind of interesting. I don't know. I think it's interesting. So, the Book of Clarence. Please watch it. And I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Now, thank you all for watching this review. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And of course, I will catch you in the next one. Have fun. Stay safe. Good luck.